Welcome back out on the mushroom trail. It's an absolutely beautiful summer day out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, July 10th. And it's been a while since I got a video out your way, so I wanted to check in and update you specifically on this phenomenal summer chanterelle season that we're in the midst of. This year was easily the earliest that I've ever stumbled across the Pacific Golden Chanterelle. That was back on June 16th. So what I'd love to do is talk a little bit about that. I'm going to start out by probably rolling some earlier footage that I took from mid-June, and then we'll work our way right up to the present, today, here in early July. Just today, as I've been out poking around here, I'm really excited about having just stumbled into my first patch of the season of the white chanterelles, Cantharellus subalbidus. So those are also hitting a little early. Let's jump into this forest. Let's see what we see. So I'll tell you what, I was just walking back from a trail run. Did not expect to bump into this guy. Check this out. This is my first one of the season, and this is easily the earliest that I've ever stumbled across these guys. This is a Pacific Golden Chanterelle. Here we are, June 16th, and wouldn't you know it, I usually, most years, I get super excited if I stumble across this guy in July. But here we are, a month early, and, this has given me pause. It's causing me to look around in this mossy little knoll a little more closely, see if I can find a few more of these guys, but boy, couldn't be more excited. So I just stumbled across that early summer chanterelle, and one of the things that I'm doing on my walk back is I'm looking around the forest, and check this out. So notice that these Oregon grapes, most of the ones I'm seeing are green, but every now and then I'm catching these bushes where they're just starting to get a little bit of color on them. You can see some of those that are partially ripe and others that are fully green. I always like to find these little ecological indicators, or seasonal indicators really, when I start to see a particular mushroom that's just beginning to flush out or fruit. I'm curious to see what else is going on in the forest at this time. For all different mushrooms, I feel like there are certain things that, I see as an indicator that, hey, I got to be on the lookout for this particular mushroom. We referenced that in the springtime in regards to the Rupas. We talked about the cottonwood buds starting to drop, and we also talked about the height of those stinging nettles, as Buck McAdoo referenced. So on a similar note, I'm paying attention to the things that are just beginning to change in this forest, exactly in the same spot where I'm finding these summer chanterelles, in the hope that, maybe in future years, I may be waltzing through the forest and I realize these Oregon grapes are just beginning to ripen. And maybe that sets off a little trigger or a little mental note for myself to really be checking some of my summer chanterelle patches to see if those are starting to bud out. Because, a lot of times in the early days of these summer chanterelles, they're not super obvious. I oftentimes feel like I have to really be looking for them. Sometimes they can be tucked underneath the mosses. So let's poke around in this forest and let's just see if there's anything else that's striking me as, a sudden or unique change that's happening right about now. Okay, so here's one more thing. Look at this. First beaked hazelnut of the season that I'm seeing hanging on this branch, right in that same location. And it's worth noting that I'm seeing a lot of hazelnuts that aren't bearing the actual hazelnuts yet. But look, this is the very first day that I'm starting to notice these, and these are right in close proximity to where those chanterelles are starting to pop. So maybe keep an eye out for these little seasonal indicators. See if you're noticing some of these same things as these chanterelles start to hit. The thing that I really like about paying attention to these indicators is that sometimes we can get a lot of variability with different elevations or lines of latitude. So these seasonal indicators don't lie, and you can follow them from location to location. And I tell you, as I've been looking around in this forest, I've been noticing more and more of these tiny little starts to these summer chanterelles. Now this thing is tiny. You can see it relative to my finger. It's about the same thickness. So not necessarily worth harvesting, but just as is the case in the fall, even in the summer where you see one, it's a good idea to move slow and look closely, especially for shrumps and little flashes of color. You can see a slightly larger one here. What I'm largely doing at this stage, I think of it as farming these chanterelles, just kind of making these mental notes of where they're starting to pop up so that I can return. Now it's worth noting that as I've been exploring for these summer chanterelles, I've been casting a fairly wide net, meaning that I've been checking up on a lot of my favorite chanterelle patches. And it's really interesting because I feel like there are certain patches that I have in the same forest that I think of as my summer chanterelle patches, and then others that are really prolific that fruit at high volume in the fall time. And both of these, are ripe with Pacific Golden Chanterelles, or what we call Pacific Golden Chanterelles. And if we're to sequence or look at the DNA of these mushrooms, they're all going to come back as Cantharellus formosus, the Pacific Golden Chanterelle. But I'm just noticing, or I'm acutely aware of the simple fact that I've got some that I think of as summer patches and others that are fall patches within the same forest, oftentimes not too far from one another. This fall patch is definitely not fruiting just yet. And it goes without saying that within a single forest, there's tons of different little microclimates, so moisture levels can vary and change. We've also got different trees doing different things at different times of the year. So that may well, be responsible for these different little fruiting habits that we see in these different chanterelle patches. A lot of people also ask, hey, is it possible that the morphological differences that we see between these summer chanterelles and some of the fall chanterelles, is it possible that we're looking at different species? And, my honest answer is I'm not really sure. I'm a huge fan of Danny Miller's work. If you haven't checked him out, check him out at alpental.com, Danny's DNA Discoveries. I know that he's referenced that, within that single species name, Cantharellus formosus, it's possible that there's more than one species hanging out that's not easily detected by the ITS regions that we're currently surveying. So interesting to think about. And take a look at this. Boy, you've gotta love it when the chanterelles start to pop out right in the middle of the trail. Look at these tiny little pins just beginning to emerge. This got me super excited for later in the season as we get into late summer, early fall. I have a feeling it's going to be a good year because, with it being as dry as it is, it's just crazy how many of these little chanterelles are already starting to emerge. And take a look back here. Here's the perfect little spot. Look, we've got a couple more just beginning to emerge. It looks like they've got some more growing to do, so I'm going to let them be, but beautiful to see. And take a look down here. So I'm just returning to a spot that I was at a few days back. I referenced this idea of farming these chanterelles. And here's the problem with that when it comes to these summer chanterelles. Take a look at this. Look at that. There's the culprit right there, caught in the act. So a lot of times these little slugs will target these summer chanterelles. And these are slow growers. They're going to be a firmer, kind of stockier mushroom than our fall Pacific Golden Chanterelles. You can see this one too. We got nothing but the stipe left. The entire cap has been decimated by these little slugs. So maybe that's a good reason to grab them when you first see them. A lot of times they don't grow to be particularly large. Look at this guy. You might remember me pointing this out a few days ago. This one seems to have escaped the wrath of the slugs. We've got a a twin there. We've got a couple chanterelles. These ones look really nice, and in light of the fact that these are getting hit so hard by these slugs, I think I better go ahead and capitalize on the opportunity when it presents. These are such a treat this time of year, and again, they've got this firmer texture. In a lot of ways, these almost, the way that they cook up and everything, sure, they've got a lot of similar flavor, similar apricot scent to those that we're going to be scooping up in the fall time. But I think because it's been so long since we've really got these on the plate, they're just such a treat, and they tend to have that firmer texture. I actually prefer these. They're different. When you're using them in the kitchen, they're a little bit different because of that firmer texture. You've got a little less to work with, but boy, such a flavorful treat to add to the omelet or other dishes that you would use chanterelles for. So definitely excited. And just look at this guy. Not bad. It's definitely not huge. It's not going to weight me down. But by the same token, there's enough on there to make it worth your while. So great find. We'll see what else we can add to the basket. And I've referenced this before in previous videos last fall, but one of the things that I really like to do, notice that we've got these chanterelles that you'll notice that I plucked. Sometimes I'll cut them because if you see down there, the bottom left of this little stump, there's a little primordia that was likely to possibly pin out and create a twin. So sometimes if I see those, I'll cut it initially. Other times what I'll do, if I've plucked it, I'll go ahead and cut off the base. And that's what I'll do with all three of these, is I'll trim this base and then I'll just kind of plant that trimming. Now, there's not necessarily consensus on, whether or not this works, but I suspect that it may. And a lot of the mycologists that I respect and whose opinions I really listen to regarding this are big proponents of this method of harvest. So, when we pluck these chanterelles from the ground, it's not necessarily disrupting. It's not similar to, like pulling up a plant by its roots or anything, because the bulk of this fungus lives underground as a mycelial web of life. So we're just basically plucking the fruit from it, but I do like to do what I can to kind of spread these mushrooms throughout the forest. So I like to believe that offering of kind of giving back and spreading these stubs throughout the forest may well lead to greater production in the future. So let me know if you've got thoughts on that. I always feel like that's an interesting practice to put into place. It's my preferred way of foraging and harvesting these chanterelles. And just revisiting one of those chanterelles from several days back, not super excited about what I'm seeing here. And if we take a closer look, I'm noticing a little bit of mold, but also slug slime. So this one was not spared. This was also the cap, especially the one on the left there. See that slime glistening and a little bit of mold, so we can see that cap got hit pretty hard by these slugs. But, still enough there to make it worth bringing home. I'll do a similar thing. I'll fill this hole in and then trim the stipe and replant the base in another location. Let's go ahead, give this guy a cut. And notice as I cut in, boy, you can hear that squeaky, firm flesh. Again, very characteristic of the chanterelles. We've got that firm white flesh. Will break somewhat like string cheese, so it'll be a little bit stringy. Let's go ahead. We'll take this base so you can see a little soil still on that. Just find this little proper spot, little digging area, and we'll go ahead and we'll get that set up. tuck it in a little bit, and hopefully this will contribute to continued flushes of chanterelles. This is kind of a small little scrap, but this time of year, we do what we can to bring these home to the dishes that we all love. And take a look right down here. So look at this tiny little piece that caught my eye, this really distinctive chanterelle yellow. We see a tiny, tiny little mushroom that's been left behind, perhaps by a rodent or otherwise. But that gives me pause, and it encourages me to check this mossy little slope a little closer than I otherwise would have. And lo and behold, take a look. So we can see these are just tiny little starts, just beginning to pop their heads out of the moss. But we can see, as I look more and more closely, we can tell a lot of these are, again, fairly dry. That's been consistently the case here in June. But I'm seeing other little signs of pins popping up. I'll probably leave the bulk of these, but may take a couple of the larger ones. And check this out. So just up from this little cluster that I was looking at a second ago, up here, tucked into this little digging or bowl, look at what we've got here. A couple more. This one, a little more reasonable. May bring this one home with me, but again, I'll probably grab a couple of these, but leave the bulk, even if that means that they're destined to bump up against the slugs. I think I'm willing to take my chances, just given the relatively small stature of these. But again, super encouraging to see these really busting out here on this slope. Given the right conditions, a little bit more moisture, this could become something. And take a look at this. So I was up walking these logs, these down trees, which is oftentimes one of my favorite ways to access different parts of the forest. And look what caught my eye down here. This looks to be pretty good size. This gets me super, super excited. Ooh. And it looks like this was already liberated by another creature or being of some sort, chewing on this, but still looks good. And boy, look at that. That's a proper chanterelle. This is definitely reasonable size, and one that makes me optimistic about things to come. In spite of how dry everything is, it's amazing that these chanterelles can still produce and grow at this capacity. And as is always the case, seeing one of these, again, prompts me to slow down, get low, and look a little more closely at what else may or may not be going on right around here in this vicinity. So this looks pretty idyllic. We've got mossy ground cover, salal, Douglas fir, hemlock mix. Looks somewhat perfect. So I suspect that as I take time and poke around in this particular little patch of forest, we're likely to come away with more. Let's see what we got here. Sure enough, take a look down here. Anything jumping out at you? It's interesting because a lot of times these summer chanterelles may not be as obvious as the ones that we encounter in the fall. They don't always break through the mossy surface. Sometimes they're just gonna barely poke their heads out. This applies to just, a lot of the summer chanterelles that we'll see, whether Pacific Golden or White Chanterelles. A lot of times they're not going to be as prominent or obvious. Take a look down here. Look at this guy, just poking out. Again, not too substantial, but as we've seen in the past, you run a risk if you leave these guys behind too frequently, you may not get a whole lot more growth depending on the moisture, and you are likely to contend with slugs depending on what forest you're poking around in. That's definitely the case in this forest. Ooh, look at this. A little more substantial. Let me see if I can liberate this little cluster. I might get a different angle on this. Let's see what we've got here. Free up that view. Give this a little tug. Little crumbly, little dry, but stoked about these ones that are revealing themselves here. And again, this is something that I easily could have walked right by had it not been for a single flag. And notice that as I peel these layers back, we've got more. I'm going to leave some of those smaller ones in that little cluster. But again, this is just kind of good reason to, if you get your flag, if you get graced with that opportunity to spot one that's prominent and obvious, it would be very unusual that you're going to find just a single lone chanterelle, even here in the summer. They tend to come up or show up in mass, at the very least in pairs. Yeah, and look at this. Man, hiding right under the surface. Little cluster. We've got at least a few. What do we got? 1, 2, 3, arguably 4 if you look at the center one fusing together. But really a beauty. And super excited. There's quite a bit of substance to this one, so wouldn't mind bumping into more of these here today. Look at what we've got here. Culprit caught in the act. Boy, it looks like just perfect timing on getting this before the slug did. So time is oftentimes of the essence this time of year, and happy to be able to get to this cluster before that slug did. So this will definitely be coming home with me. We'll see what else is out here. And sure enough, they keep coming. It's interesting because these little patches just kind of continue to produce. And like we said before, slow down, take time. Look in those kind of not so obvious spots, under logs, under sticks, ferns. A lot of times these have a knack for being able to find the perfect little hiding spots. And you can see, not small, but also not huge. A lot of the summer chanterelles, this is about what I expect this time of year. Really excited about these. And just up the trail here, we've got another just interesting little sight that kind of stands out this time of year. I don't see a ton of these in the summer. This, of course, is one of our brittle gills, a russula of some sort. Very difficult to determine exactly which one this is. But again, one of the characteristics of this, which is a very, very common family of mushroom to encounter, especially in the fall out here, these stems or stipes will actually break like chalk. And this is because these particular mushrooms have a spherical cell structure or shape. So that contributes to this really kind of brittle breaking pattern. Not a great example. You can see this one has been severely compromised by bugs. But again, this is cool to see in the summer. I don't see a ton of these mushrooms out in the summer, so we're getting a little flash of what's to come in greater abundance in the fall. So just figured I'd pause to point that out. And take a look out across this mossy little knoll. See if anything's jumping out at you. I detected one little flash of Chanterelle yellow-orange, and I suspect that there's more than one in here. But see if you detect anything. Take a look right down here, hiding under this fern. We've got very characteristic sign here. Give this guy a little bit of a tug, and let's take a look. So reasonable size. Again, not huge, but definitely a chanterelle. Notice this one, it's almost as if the ridges, the spore-bearing surface underneath, is tough to detect there. Almost looks like it's got a little bit of a lobster quality to it, and just kind of a more uniform or deformed shape or status. But I suspect that there's more than just that one, because as we've alluded to before, oftentimes where there's one, there's many. You know, there's a couple days of potential rain in the near forecast here, so this is one of those spots that I'm kind of eager to check back on, given a more enhanced weather situation with a little bit of precipitation or even increased humidity would probably, I suspect, bring a little bit more to the surface in terms of chanterelles. So this is definitely a spot that I'll be back to in the not too distant future here. And it's been a few days, so I figured I'd check up on one of the patches that I spent a little bit of time in a few days ago, and look at this, lo and behold, I see the signs of more chanterelles. So very possible that I just kind of overlooked this one. Looks like maybe even stepped on it, who knows. I'm under no delusions that I see them all. I'm sure I'm missing plenty of chanterelles all the time. So, but interesting to see that, you know, even these patches that I've already kind of pruned still seem to be bearing fruit. So don't forget to check back on the spots that you may have foraged from in previous days. And what a perfect day it is. So today, July 10th, I'm out in the forest and I'm actually revisiting a spot to check up on a very special mushroom that I actually first encountered a couple days ago. And, you know, with a little moisture in the forecast, I decided to leave it to let it grow out a little bit. But today, after, you know, we never really did get a lot of rain. We got increased humidity. I saw humidity levels up near 80 or 90%, and perhaps a little sprinkle out here, but not much in the way of true precipitation. I'm going to jockey around this branch here that's restricting my ability to get close. But take a look at this. This, I couldn't be more excited. Notice we've got sort of a white ivory colored cluster here. So those of you who've been watching the channel for a while surely recognize this. Give it a tug here. Take a look. Look at that, just beautiful. So look at how much more dense and solid this is. This is my first white chanterelle of the season. This is Cantharellus subalbidus. This is one of my absolute favorite mushrooms. And you know, I've really come to prefer this over the Pacific Golden. Notice it's got, so this is an ivory color, but notice it's got a little yellow down there at the base. These will do this as they get dried out or as they get aged or even bruised or handled. They'll bruise golden. So sometimes if one of these white chanterelles is weathered, sometimes people confuse it with the Pacific Golden Chanterelle because it can get those golden hues. Go ahead and give this a proper brushing off. And you know, as I brush this, where I'm brushing it will likely turn a yellowish golden color from that bruising, but what a beauty. And yeah, look at this. Exact same mushroom, but now I've handled it and I've brushed it. And look at how it stains this golden color. So again, you can see how, especially if you're just getting started, you're out there harvesting your first chanterelles perhaps, you know, this is one that you could easily forage and harvest and get it home and see it all golden yellowish and mistake it for Cantharellus formosus, the Pacific Golden Chanterelle. But this is definitely, in truth, a white chanterelle, Cantharellus subalbidus. And this is one that I absolutely prefer. This is my favorite. It's I encounter it less frequently in that firmer flesh. It's such a treat for me. I always look forward to these. And of course, it wouldn't be complete without finding some of that guy's friends. Take a look here. Do you notice anything? These white chanterelles are notorious for being super difficult to spot or to get into the swing of things for really detecting them. So notice, you could barely see just the smallest little hint of that ivory white color. Oftentimes, even in the height of the season, it's not unusual for these guys to stay hidden underneath the surface. So when I'm hunting for the white chanterelle, I'll oftentimes look for these shrumps or these mushroom bumps where the duff or moss has been pushed up by the mushrooms that are hiding just underneath the surface. So these guys, typically very dense, stout little mushrooms that won't oftentimes break too high or prominently above the moss. What a beauty, right? Look at that thing. And this is always a fun moment. We'll go ahead and give this a tug and see exactly what we're dealing with here. We get in there. Oh, that thing went a little flying. So definitely dried out, similar to a lot of the Pacific Goldens that we've been seeing. You could see that there's not a lot of moisture in this guy. It broke rather sharply, just a hallmark of just how dry it is. But we see this dense little cluster, and again, this is characteristic of these summer chanterelles in general. We can see a couple more little fruit bodies there. I'm going to actually leave those in the hopes that they may sprout out more. I see a little primordia down there too in the bottom right. So I may tuck these guys in, let them remain out here and do their thing, but you can see that white ivory color. And again, this is going to stain or bruise that golden color, and you can see it on those little bumps or indentations there. It's already happened. And a lot of times if I bump into a chanterelle where there's any deliberation or debate over whether it's a white chanterelle or a Pacific Golden, aside from the ivory color, I'll check, especially underneath close to where those ridges are, those spore-bearing surfaces. That'll tend to be bleach white on these white chanterelles. And you can see as I'm handling it, it's getting even more golden, so it's getting more tricky to differentiate. But these are going to tend to be a little denser, a little thicker, and just have a little stouter stature to them. Look at that. What a beauty. And it's possible that this, may have had a bigger, brighter future ahead of it. Some may argue that I'm foraging or harvesting this early. But again, this time of year, especially with a lot of hot days ahead of us, I feel the need to capitalize on this, especially since it's been so long since I tasted one of these. And check this out. Here's a perfect example. So this is really close to where those white chanterelles were. But notice this. I can tell right out of the gate that we're looking at a Pacific Golden Chanterelle here. So for one thing, it's got a little bit of a slender profile, but it's also got, of course, this golden color on the cap even before it's been handled or dried out. And if we look underneath, let's take a look. So yeah, look at how those ridges that are just starting to develop. See how those are that deep golden color? That's oftentimes where I'll fix my gaze if I've got one that kind of straddles the edge between a white and Pacific Golden. I'll look at that ridge structure, the spore-bearing surface underneath the cap, and try to detect or pick up on what color there is there. Now Cascadensis, yeah, that's going to be lighter, but that's not in this forest that I'm in here, so very easy call and easy to differentiate the white and golden by looking at the ridge structure and just these other characteristics combined. And of course, as is so often the case, where there's one, there's usually two. So just kind of poking around in this moss, it's easy to pick up on yet another tiny little Pacific Golden Chanterelle beginning to pop out. I feel like ordinarily I wouldn't forage that, but just to kind of give you that side-by-side look in such close proximity to the white chanterelle is good to see. And just up the trail here, boy, I love it when this happens. Take a look. So we've got what I commonly refer to as a flag, a mushroom that's so strikingly obvious that you can see it from many, many feet away. And you know, a lot of times this is an indicator, as we referenced before, of the presence of more chanterelles. Let's see what we can find. Yeah, take a look at this. Beauty, right? And now this one, we'll give it a little tug. This is not necessarily one that I would have easily detected just walking down the trail, but its buddy kind of gave it away. And boy, just look at that. Really pretty well developed ridges underneath there, especially for a summer chanterelle. That's not always the case. So super good to see, decent sized mushroom popping out of the moss here. And again, this isn't necessarily one that I would have easily detected or spotted just strolling down the trail had it not been for the one lone mushroom that was obvious. And so this one of the prize mushrooms of the day, super excited to bring this back with me. And of course, I'll also go back and get the obvious one, but before I do that, I'm going to definitely scour this area and see if there's more of these that are of similar stature hiding nearby. I suspect there may be, so let's take a look and let's see what we can find. So again, there's our original flag. We just pulled the one, and as I poke around and kind of look a little more closely in this vicinity, look at what we've got here. Never would have seen this if I didn't slow down and heed the warning of the obvious one. Look at this. Beautiful little cluster. It looks like 3 separate mushrooms. Let's see once we get them up here. Yeah, look at that. Just beautiful little summer chanterelles popping out everywhere we look in this little area. Let's look some more, see if we can find some friends. And boy, we're getting a nice little pile going. I tell you, now that we're in July, they're taking on a pretty good size and character. So we're really getting into the season. Let's see, is this a rock or a chanterelle? Don't mistake this one for a chanterelle. You're liable to break a tooth. Definitely a rock. We've got this other small one back here. You know, I think, put the rock back, I think we'll leave this chanterelle here and check back on it later. And I suppose this is as good a time as any to take a quick second to mention that if you're liking these videos, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe, hit the bell to stay notified so you don't miss any videos. All this is free, and it's a great way to support the channel. And real quick, here's another really cool native plant this one's been catching my eye this summer in particular. This is what's commonly referred to as the Blackcap or Whitebark raspberry, sometimes just black raspberry, but this is one of our wild raspberry bushes. And you know, this is one of those ones that I don't see as often as some of the other berry bushes. You know, the trailing blackberries are really going right now. They're one of my favorite berries. But this one, just note the way that looks. So it's got those small little hairs, and when they're ripe, they'll get to be this dark color. This is one that, you know, if you see this out in the forest, I'd recommend stopping, spending some time with this one. It's not incredibly rare, but it's also not as common as some of the other berry bushes that I bump into more frequently out here. So it's now July 11th, and I was just out on a trail run today, and I was thinking I gotta add one more little bit to this video last minute. So I just wanted to replay a story for you all. So a couple weeks back, I was out on a trail run in a local park here, the same one that I'm in right now. And you know, I just stopped running and I'm moving down the trail, and I see someone just off to the side of the trail poking around in the salal, and I thought, oh, what's going on here? So I asked her, finding anything interesting? And she said, yeah. So I asked her what, and she looked at me with a huge grin and said summer chanterelles. So we got to talking, and come to find out that she's a viewer to the channel, and she had just stumbled across her first patch of summer chanterelles, which was awesome. Just made my day bumping in to you, Rupa, and so I just wanted to give you a quick hello. And I'm out on a run here today, and I figured I would check in on your patch real quick. So here I am at Rupa's patch. I dare not pick in this area, but check it out. So growing just off the trail, I wanted to show you, Rupa, that this is about 2 weeks later, and it looks like it's still fruiting out pretty good. So hopefully you've been a frequent attendee to your little patch here. I figured I would do you a quick favor and cover a few of these with some salal leaves and whatnot, just to not give your secret spot away. So if you're out here in the forest this weekend, definitely check in, and don't forget to look under those ferns and salal leaves, because there just may be a few more summer chanterelles waiting for you out here in the forest. So, such a pleasure. Really appreciated the chat that we had, and just bumping into you was so good. So, hopefully you're enjoying the summer chanterelles. And just a quick reminder to all the viewers out there, don't forget, next time you're out in the forest, smile at the folks you see, say hello, and just spread the joy of being out here in the forest. Until next time, happy trails.